Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I'm your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, May 5th, and we will hear the presentation, Nature-Based Solutions, Cutting-Edge Planning for Sustainability. For content questions related to the presentation, you can type those in the Q&A box. For any other questions, technical type questions that you have, again, just feel free to type them in the Q&A box. I'll do my best to answer those technical questions as I see them, but your content questions we'll answer at the end during the Q&A. Coming up on your screen is a list of our sponsoring APA chapters and divisions for 2023. Thanks to all those participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to members. Today, we are sponsored by a collaboration of divisions to host the Sustainability and Resilience series. You'll hear a little bit more about that in a moment from Carla. These are our last two webcasts of May. We're actually booking out towards the end of August now. So to register for these and all of our upcoming sessions, head over to our website, ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. Today's session has been approved for 1.5 CM credits and one of the specialized required sustainability and resilience credits. You can log your credits by heading over to planning.org, log into your My APA account, and from there, you can either search by today's event number or title, both of which can be found on our website, again, ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. If you're on social media, be sure to like us on Facebook. That's where I post any important date or time changes. I post when new sessions are available for you to register for, and I send out a weekly reminder of what's on deck for Friday. And head over to YouTube and subscribe to our channel. Just search Planning Webcast and we'll pop up on all of our platforms. And if you head over to YouTube and subscribe, you'll see that we have well over 400 session recordings, all available for free. We record all of our sessions and post them there, including today's session. So again, head over to our YouTube channel and subscribe so that you get notified when we have new sessions up and ready. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Carla with the Sustainable Communities Division to kick us off today. Carla.
Thank you, Christine, and welcome to the Sustainability and Resilience series. I'm Carla Ebenbach with Ebenbach Consulting based in Miami, Florida, and chair of the APA Sustainable Communities Division. And I'm happy to present today's session. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the series and encourage you to keep attending. The series was created to provide opportunities for planning professionals to broaden and deepen their knowledge while allowing them to earn the AICP Sustainability and Resilience CM credit live or on demand. And so we're thankful to Christine Dorsey and the Planners Webcast series for partnering with us to bring the series to life. These series recordings are a permanent library of resources available for free, thanks to the dedicated efforts of fellow professionals donating their time and expertise to make presentations and organize events. So now available on the YouTube playlist that Christine mentioned are all of these great sessions, too many to read off, but I'll note that the most recent addition is our April session, which was called The Climate Planner, Strategies for Engaging on Climate When It's Challenging. You can follow that link to find any of these, and we will post today's event in the chat as well. We will post the recording for this event soon as well. There are more exciting sessions coming up with top-notch professionals. You can go to the next slide, Christine. In 2023, save the date for these two programs coming up in June and July. Very soon, registration will open for these, and there are others coming up in the year as well. Next slide. So you are about to hear Nature-Based Solutions, Cutting-Edge Planning for Sustainability. During today's session, we'll hear from 3 professionals whose years of experience addressing the need for sustainable solutions through the lens of planning, engineering, and/or landscape architecture brings us the diverse array of ideas and approaches that you'll hear about today. So we're here to learn and come away with some ideas that'll be applicable in our own communities. Planners can make a visible and important difference given their role in putting forth solutions and in facilitating local processes. So our actions, the plans we write, have the potential to create lasting positive change in the community and the environment around us. You'll have the chance today to ask questions, and there will be a couple of polling questions which will help the panelists get to know you better. Next slide. And today's panelists are experts on this subject, and I'll let them fully introduce themselves, but I'll let you know that we're going to hear from Paul Lander, an adjunct associate professor of geography at University of Colorado and a landscape architect as well. He has been working in water, land, and energy conservation for over 40 years. We're also going to hear from Jennifer Johnson, Director of Resilience Planning and Design with Niche Engineering in Boston. She has over 17 years of experience in civil and water resources engineering. And finally, APA's own Neil Angus, an environmental planner with Devon's Enterprise Commission in North Central Massachusetts. Neil holds an FAICP certification, and he specializes in green building and green infrastructure. So thank you for attending today. Christine, I'll turn it back to you for the first polling question.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and launch it now. Our panelists just want to know where you're coming from. So we'll take a few seconds and give it another second. I'm going to go ahead and close it now. Oh, they're still coming in. We get the idea. Here we go. I'm going to show the results. Everywhere. So the majority, I guess, Northeast region, followed by the Southern region, Midwest, West, and then some international folks. So welcome. Our second polling question, I'm going to go ahead and launch right now. What is the discipline of your primary responsibilities? And panelists, if you're wondering, you can't vote. So if you don't see anything, that's why you don't get to vote. Okay, let me go ahead and close it up and share our results. The vast majority of us are in the, I guess, traditional current and long range planning field, followed by some others, maybe some academics, nonprofits, things like that. Environmental came in next, followed by engineering, and then some landscape architecture and urban design and land management, parks, open space, right-of-ways. Okay. That's what we've got on the line here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we can move right into our first panelist, Paul Lander. So let me go ahead and stop sharing. And Paul, it's all you. And you're on mute.
Thank you, Christine. And thank you all for being here today. This is a great opportunity for us to share just a little bit of information about nature-based systems, something that's of increasing interest to lots of communities and certainly to all of you as professionals. As Carla said, I currently teach part-time at the University of Colorado, but I've been a longtime practitioner mostly in energy, land, and water conservation in urban systems. But there's a lot of activity happening in those realms, so pretty exciting times for us to think about that. And today we're going to lay out a little bit what that is. Well, as the kind of geographer in the room, I often have to start to think of context, right? So here's a slide about the region where I work. And as you all know from practice or from living, or traveling, it's just very different in the West. But also, I think it's important to remember especially when you're talking about nature-based systems, the bioregion really is the framework in which we operate. And typically our codes and our comprehensive plans reflect that or refer to that. But nature-based systems, by all means, bring that much into more focus. And frankly, that's one of the challenges and opportunities we have in front of us of remembering more about that natural framework in which we operate and giving nod to it, and then harnessing those natural systems and environmental services that bring so much to our habitat. So
Hey,
this is really,
Paul, I'm sorry.
yes.
Could you just put your slides in a presentation mode just so we
Oh,
can see them better?
sorry.
That's what I'm here for.
No, absolutely appreciate it.
Thank
Great.
you.
Okay.
That looks great. Thank you.
No, thank you. Sorry I didn't do that, folks. So really, I just want to talk a little bit as an intro here about, why we do this kind of work. Well, the built environment, as you all know, is a set of nested ecosystems, both physical and cultural. And the bioregion, again, is a frame that we have to think about, but also all of our community standards and codes. That's how we kind of define how we do that. Nature-based systems are increasingly being looked at as needed to be part of those codes and standards. So we begin to incorporate more environmental services. There's certainly elements and flows within all that we think about, and you'll hear a lot more from me and the other presenters, how critical your allied professionals are in this work. We all have expertise we bring to the table, but this is certainly a collaborative effort, including from the community. Preaching to the choir here, but sometimes it's helpful for us to remember, especially if we're having to turn around and convince other people that trees and landscapes and nature-based systems in the most global sense are very valuable assets for most of our communities. And increasingly, we have better and better information, and I'll share one later, where we can begin to delineate and actually give a fair amount of detail to the financial value that those services offer to our communities. And so it's an important thing to remember, as you know, making the pitch for nature-based services like anything else. Different recipients of the information respond to different things, but it's always nice to have a good financial basis to any discussion. This is, again, reminding us, why do we do what we do? Well, we've done a very good job, if you can say that, of creating a lot of impervious surface in our urban areas. And so in the largest sense, what we're trying to do with nature-based services is bring back a lot of perviousness, recognizing we need a lot more infiltration and flow, and letting water particularly do the thing that it naturally wants to do. It comes down distributed. We often collect it and concentrate it, which has some also problems. So the more we can catch water on site and where it's at, the more helpful that is to both the healthier streams of our area, as well as to our centralized systems. And there's plenty of science out there that's documented over the years. It doesn't take much impervious surface, frankly, way less than we have in most urban areas, to begin to see impacts in our natural areas. Remembering, especially for those of us in the West, but I would say most anyway, one of the advantages we recognize and remember with nature-based services is when we begin to get water back into the ground in more local situations, neighborhoods, small sites, those kinds of things, we're able to utilize groundwater to grow an awful lot of things. These are just a couple of examples from the West, but the one on the bottom right from Brad Lancaster, who's done a lot of work some of you may be aware of, that's in Tucson, Arizona, that only gets 11 inches of rain a year. Now, that may be too woolly or too wild of a landscape for you, but it's fairly demonstrative as a pilot to show you what you can do when you think about actually capturing the water you have available and redirecting it for a purpose. And that's really the basis of nature-based systems. And then the upper right, just as an academic, are reminding us soil moisture is a huge resource that frankly most of the world relies upon, who doesn't have centralized or distributed distribution systems. So it's one of the things we're recognizing as we learn more about nature-based systems, how to utilize that resource as a better way. Another approach we're seeing in a lot of places, not just in the West, was trying to get some frame to that, especially on the water use side. How do we know if we're being effective in that? Well, we haven't measured historically very accurately, and you're going to hear more and more about, especially from Neo and Jen, about putting things in and how do we have metrics and measurement and monitoring, how critical that is for the adaptive management that we need to use for nature-based systems. Well, one of the concepts that's gotten some traction is something called a water budget, that anyone who's ever done a hydrologic balance will understand, basically water in, water out. But it begins to answer the question for nature-based services, but in this case, the water budget. What are we getting for our water? So here's an aerial view, and you can see where we're able to delineate kind of the light yellow green, both the landscape area as well as the rooftops in white squares, and then the parking lot. So we can very quickly begin to calculate the pervious area that is potentially landscape. And then on the right, we can allocate a certain amount of water to that. This case with the rising and falling colored bars shows and follows the evapotranspiration changes over the months in the west. So we only allocate as much water as the plants need. What we're going to find as we move forward in this field that we need more and continuous monitoring and measurement to make sure we are getting those environmental services that we require. We're also doing a lot in kind of policy and framing why we do that, right? So many of you probably have heard the story of Denver's Green Buildings Ordinance that really started out as a green roof mandate from the citizens who voted back to, all buildings in Denver shall have a green roof. Well, the good news is fairly quickly we realized that was physically impossible, but everybody got together, went through a arduous process of 12 to 18 months and came out with, frankly, a better outcome, looking at if the goal was to make buildings less detrimental to the environment, we can do that to actually be more positive. And so it encompasses more about green buildings, so that any kind of roof surface, for example, you can, as you'll see in the chart on the right, you can address being green, quote, in a bunch of different ways, not just with plant material. This is another local initiative. This happens to be in Boulder. We're looking again at where the urban landscape in the largest sense can be a part of adapting, mitigating climate changes, and also thinking about carbon and those kinds of things. These are three sub-themes that they've looked at, both providing for pollinators, connecting canopies to reduce temperatures, really looking at trees and urban forests. And then again, on the stormwater side, looking at absorbent landscapes, where most every landscape can think about absorbing both water in a traditional sense, as well as carbon and other kinds of inputs that way. So more communities are starting to see this is the direction we want to go. And the next kind of phase, as you're going to hear from the next two speakers, what some of the techniques are that might address these three areas. So the good news is we're moving towards a future where we're trying to address some of these things and offering a lot more resources for everyone, right? Climate resilient urban landscapes offer a lot of potential for us and a lot of possibilities, but we have a ways to go and a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of other ways to look at it. One of the small things by a nonprofit in Colorado, they've done that in a sense to make it more available to a lot of people, where in this case, it's called Garden in the Box, kind of putting something in a package, if you will. Well, it's not only a package that gets out to the people in your community, but as you can see in the bottom, 23 different cities have actually now subscribed to this program with almost 10,000 units distributed last year, because again, it was in a packaged format where we could begin to look at what we understand about nature-based systems or things that are more climate friendly to whatever our bioregion is. We can do that in a way that's much more easily adaptable and frankly implementable. So it doesn't necessarily have to be custom at every kind of level. This is just a couple of slides to remind you here that, collaborations and partnerships, which you're going to hear more about, those are key. These are a couple of slides, and I encourage you to go look out that resource that's listed on the bottom. There's a reference at the end again about stacked incentives, and all that really means is, when we start making changes in nature-based systems, all the elements that come together, there's often a lot of different agencies or institutions who are interested in the positive outcomes of that change. Well, that represents an opportunity to sit down, have a good conversation, and if there's any way to collaborate and really, frankly, optimize your input with their input as well, you create a collaboration that brings more resources to the table than historically has been possible. Another basic concept, you're going to hear a lot more details. This actually happens in the Netherlands, of course, where they've been doing it forever. Ultimately, water is a physical resource that needs somewhere to go. We think a lot more, and a lot of poor people are concerned about flooding. Well, that water has to go somewhere. And unlike electronics or digital, a lot of the rest of our world that keeps shrinking down, water is physical. It needs a place to go. So either we design a place for it to go, as you're going to hear about through nature-based systems, or it's going to go wherever it wants to. So it's helpful to remember that. The other thing to remember, just happens from Seattle, where a lot of you probably know, green nature-based systems aren't really just a horizontal feature. They can be vertical. Seattle's done that both in the case of trees, but also even large wall exposures. So more communities, depending on the bioregion, are looking at that kind of as an opportunity. And again, just reiterating what I said before, a tremendous amount of environmental systems we get from nature, and recognizing that. And frankly, what we're trying to do now is be more transparent about that and more intentional and bring those in, because that is the backbone of our future infrastructure. A great detailed report I'd encourage you to look at that really explains this triple bottom line. How do we look at all the possible benefits of the things that Neil or Jen are going to be talking about? Because sometimes they're way beyond traditional environmental services, air quality, heat stress, actually not only avoided maintenance and replacement, but tremendous health benefits. And so you start looking at some of these things, they're very, very strong cases for a lot of green infrastructure and nature-based systems. So we've got good information to make this thing. And just reminding again, as well as lots of public health and tremendous amounts of mental health benefits that we get that we traditionally haven't gotten from gray infrastructure. So with that, I'm going to turn it back. This is my resource slide. I'd encourage you to come back to this later if you need to. By all means, get hold of me if you have any specific questions, but otherwise, I'll turn it back to those who are running the show.
Okay, Jennifer, you are up next.
All right, thank you. I don't know if you want to turn my video back on for me, Christine. I will attempt to share my screen here.
I don't think I can do that. I think you have to restart your video yourself.
All right, let's see here.
There you are. Hi.
Perfect.
Good.
Hi. Okay, and I'm going to share my screen now. Great. Are we good there?
Yes, it looks great.
All right. Thanks, Christine. All right. Well, my name is Jennifer Johnson. I'm the Director of Resilience Planning and Design at Niche Engineering, which is a Boston-based consulting firm. So I'm coming to you both as kind of a token engineer in this conversation, though I saw there might be 10 others with us today, but also as part of a multidisciplinary team out of New England. Our team really focuses on utilizing the strengths of multiple professions, including planning, engineering, and landscape, to really develop holistic solutions that are anticipating climate change and other stressors that impact our environment. So I'm going to be building on a lot of what Paul has already talked about, some of these common themes that we're seeing. Even though Paul is based in Denver and I'm based in New England, we see a lot of common ground. And I think these conversations are so important in terms of information sharing and really building on the successes that we're all seeing. I'm going to jump right in to some engineering here. You can see this slide, this idea of compounding issues of gray infrastructure. This is something that has really been building over the last 20 years. When you have a closed drainage system like you see here, a lot of these were built 50, 75 years ago, but even those were only built in the last 10 or 20 years are already undersized because the rapid pace that precipitation patterns are changing. And when we utilize these types of systems, they're only built for one purpose, and that is to capture, put into the ground or put into a pipe and spit out the water at a downstream water body. So the gray infrastructure exceeds its capacity. This is being trivialized even further by climate change and larger storm events. And landscape is really not considered part of the package. So you can see that broader planning mindset of how do all of these systems work together really hasn't been considered in the past as much as that should have been. So how do we get over that? Well, I think we already know the solution is really thinking about how do we increase sustainability and resilience through nature-based systems, and really thinking about all of the different relationships between buildings, the built environment, utilities, our water systems, the landscape, and partnering them together for maximum impact. And I think we all know that we can't completely abandon gray infrastructure. It does serve a purpose. But by really partnering gray infrastructure with green and nature-based solutions, we're going to be able to build in a lot more resilience into our built environment. And as Paul mentioned, the triple bottom line of green infrastructure and nature-based solutions is so far-reaching. Climate change is not just a utility or built environment issue. It's really a human issue. And I think these benefits really get down to that in terms of reducing heat impacts and thinking about combined sewer overflows and the benefits that we see from that and the health of our ecosystems, restoring natural hydrologic conditions, recharging our aquifers, especially out west, and then thinking about sequestering carbon and improving economic development. There's so many benefits to these types of systems. And I'm going to get into the actual practicalities of green infrastructure and nature-based solution. And then Neil is actually going to get even more specific for his Massachusetts community today. So what does it look like? Well, implementing nature-based solutions looks like things like this, right? We add landscape back into our built environment, utilizing tools like bioswales, green roofs, like Paul mentioned, wet meadows, and really robust nature, soil, plant-based systems like bioretention basins. Permeable pavement isn't actually green, right? It's gray or black like asphalt, but it allows us to utilize and protect additional natural resources around parking lots because it's a stacked system that is absorbing and putting water back into the ground in locations where it can. So I'd like to include it as a green infrastructure solution. So partnering those types of smaller strategies with larger ecological restoration and floodplain restoration, like you see examples of here, and even thinking about how we can build in more robust gray infrastructure when we need to for flood mitigation, which is an issue that we're not going to get away from. So it's balancing smaller water quality based improvements with these larger challenging situations of more runoff, more increased runoff, and coastal sea level rise type issues. All right, so how do we get this done? So I'm going to be talking a little bit more through some key tools, some of the tools you see here, drivers and common strategies, and tying them into a few case studies from Eastern New England, as well as other parts of Eastern United States. So from our perspective, there's so many different tools that need to be utilized to get our communities to be as resilient as we need them to be. So thinking about every aspect of site planning and design needs to be considered. So from proactive planning that so many of you are working on, thinking about more engineering solutions like increased capacity. How do we get that water to go where we want it to go? As Paul mentioned, water doesn't listen. We really need to proactively direct it, or else it's going to go in areas where we don't want to. Public and private collaboration. Now that we're getting more data, I'm going to talk a little bit more about data. And modeling, we're recognizing the challenges that we're facing. So understanding that it isn't just a public or government issue, it's not just a private landholder issue. We really need to come together to think about the optimized areas to hold water and provide that type of nature-based solution and treatment. And then also thinking about data-driven design. This is something that's really exciting to me as we're kind of in an era where we're actually getting more data, and it's not just designing to the best of our abilities, it's designing based on past lessons learned and past data that we've collected. And it's really allowing us to improve and optimize our designs and kind of feeding, that feedback loop so that we can actually continue to make strides towards bigger and better impacts in the face of climate change. All right, so I'm going to jump into a few more key themes and benefits of nature-based solutions from my engineering and planning hat perspective. So the first being the restoration of hydrology and landscape ecology. And this gets back to that idea of the multiple systems. So thinking about the landscape as a system, our first line of defense to absorb stormwater, capture it, use the soils and the plants around our built environment to treat and hold water before it gets to the gray infrastructure system. So stormwater doesn't understand project boundaries. So really thinking about how these interstitial spaces between buildings and roadways can really be served as a performative landscape. And then that actually ties into our next benefit and really driver for these types of systems. And that's the increasing resilience to climate change. So we can think about hydrology on the site and even district or neighborhood scale, but these issues of climate change are much broader than that. And so kind of piecing together these projects and to create much bigger projects with much bigger impacts so that we can tackle the scale of issues that we're seeing. And this is an example from Boston. And actually, this is a dry weather high tide event down by the wharf in Boston. If you've come to Boston, you can see these on these king tide events. I wanted to include this slide. This is an example of a project thinking about both hydrologic, landscape, and utility improvements. This is City Hall Plaza in Boston. Boston City Hall is not known for being the most beautiful building with its brutalist architecture, and the plaza was not much different, actually. Unfortunately, it was kind of an eyesore, a lot of brick. It's over major utility corridors and MBTA, our local transit system. So recently, the project went forward to think about how they can balance restoration of the plaza, thinking more about landscape and heat, how to provide those benefits with the performance of the space in terms of stormwater management, and also maintaining the programming, because it is such an important area in the city. There's rallies and our parades are held here when we actually win some of our sports titles. So this is a really important space, and I encourage you to come visit because it's undergone such a huge transformation over the last few years. It's finally built. Also in Boston, I wanted to mention a few examples of how the city is going forward with building consensus, because that's such an important barrier to overcome with nature-based solutions, kind of the mindset that we're already doing so much. Why do we need to push this even harder? So the Boston Water and Sewer Commission certainly has a lot of challenges with water quality, and they're trying to utilize as many tools as possible to disseminate this information about how the practicality of how to implement more green infrastructure. So one of the ways that they've done that is to develop this green infrastructure planning and design handbook. And I've provided the link below. I welcome you to come and check the whole resource out. It goes into certain local drivers for nature-based solutions and green infrastructure, but just also gets into the practicality of how to design them and implement them given certain site constraints. You can see here's the suitability matrix. It's thinking about things like density and soil permeability, microclimate, if it's its relative location within a treatment train, maintenance costs. It's thinking about all of those things to help point you in the right direction to choosing the right stormwater green infrastructure tool. There's a lot more resources in there, and it actually gets down to the tool by tool programmatic calculations to do some early calculations to start sizing these types of things as well. So a lot of great resources there. And I wanted to mention as well that obviously maintenance is another barrier that's often mentioned in the conversations of nature-based solutions, and anytime that you're using a living environment to treat stormwater. So Boston Water and Sewer is actually working currently on a operation and maintenance manual specific to green infrastructure. So that's something that should be available really soon, and will be a resource available on their website. So shifting across the river into the city of Cambridge, they're also doing a lot of work to build consensus, to push innovation forward. And I think this is a great example of how they've used planning documents, in this case, their climate change vulnerability assessment, the CCVA, and have built on the data that was developed initially for that resource into some integrated modeling that puts together both the storm surge and sea level rise issues that we know are coming with precipitation-driven rainfall. And it really has generated these maps that are being used by practitioners across and developers across the city to understand what the flood risks are under 2030, 2050, 2070 climate scenarios, and allowing them to really get the full picture. Because one of the challenges that we're seeing is 2030 is, 7 years from now. It's sometimes before these projects will even be built. So it's not even in the future. And these projections are certainly within the typical lifespan of a given development. So we need to be thinking about these now as we're designing. And this puts numbers to that so that we have a target. They've also utilized all of this information to inform their regulations. And I provided an example here of the 2021 stormwater regulations that they put forth. They also have a green roof bylaw, similar to what Paul was mentioning. So it's driving their policy, which is driving forward innovation and site design, because as an engineer working in that city, it's pushing us forward to really think more broadly about the types of solutions that we can fit in these dense urban environments. One example of that I wanted to provide is this public Montessori and middle school that's located in the city that we worked on, that was not only being designed as its own site with its own stormwater management system that included things like this rain garden that you see out front, as well as some major rainwater harvesting and reuse to be used for irrigation on the fields out back. But this, based on the, let me go back. Based on the modeling that was performed in that part of the city, this area was identified as a site that needed to hold even more water to help protect the neighborhood surrounding the school. So there's a 1.5 million gallon stormwater storage tank being proposed in the bus loop, as well as a 150,000 gallon rain garden with subsurface storage that helps get water that was being collected at a low point in the driveway, which was at the intersection of some residential neighborhoods. So I thought that was a great example of a city partnering with its own projects on how to think at multiple scales of solution. I also wanted to note some of the drivers are actually on, this is at Harvard Business School. These are being driven by the users of the space. So in this case, it's students really pushing forward and demanding additional sustainability and stewardship initiatives. So this is kind of that student-driven environmental activism. There's a lot of energy there, which is really exciting for us because they're going to be our future planners and engineers. They're also pushing for performance-based standards and tracking against metrics and making sure that the schools are moving that forward. Also thinking, this is the world that you live in terms of planning for future development, but when you're thinking about planning for future development, considering where those large tracts of land are going to be, where we can propose some of the broader ecological other things that might help us really push forward nature-based solutions on the bigger scale, which is what we need to be doing, especially at the master plan level. If we don't do it then, there's no hope for in the future. So this really helps us realize that economy of scale and being able to plan ahead and make sure that when we put a shovel in the ground, we've already thought through what is the best use of this space from the perspective of water management. And then finally, I'll leave you with additional thoughts about data-driven design, which again, I think is the most exciting, one of the most exciting things happening right now. This is an example of a streetscape in Washington, D.C., Kennedy Street, where the city, DC Water had the foresight into wanting to collect data before and after the systems were built. And you can see here we have permeable paving parking lanes, we have some integrated tree pits, fire retention bump outs, there's dry wells, there's so many elements of green infrastructure here. And the intention of these systems was to reduce the amount of water being discharged to the gray infrastructure, because in this case, it's a combined sewer and they really needed to hold that space for sewage and not for stormwater that could be managed elsewhere. So there was data collection at the beginning of the project before everything was built. You can see that the wet weather flow here is on the y-axis, and all these gray dots represent the wet weather flow over various rainfall events. And then after the implementation of all of these systems, so there was an 83% reduction in the volume of wet weather flow. And that was a catalyst for further implementation of green infrastructure throughout Washington, D.C. They've had a number of spin-off projects based on this. I think this is really exciting. We're seeing more need and more gathering of data to help inform the MS4 permit program, which is a stormwater program that requires wet and dry sampling of stormwater management to really quantify your quality, and a lot more opportunities even for citizen science, which I think is really exciting to see, getting more engaged and realizing the benefits there and using that to inform the public and again, build that collaboration. So with those thoughts, I'm actually going to turn it over to Neil. I think Neil's next, right? I can unshare.
I am.
All right, Neil, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jen. I will get my picture back up here, if I can. There we go. Hello, everybody. All right, let me get my slides up here and we'll get started. All right, so like Carla said, I am Neil Angus. I'm an environmental planner with the Devon's Enterprise Commission. We are the regulatory authority that is overseeing the redevelopment of an old military base about 35 miles outside of Boston, former Fort Devens. It is a Superfund site, left with a lot of brownfield sites that have been cleaned. A lot have been cleaned up to date. But when the base closed down in 1993, the surrounding towns got together and the state got together and they wanted to see how they could redevelop in a more responsible manner. So sustainable redevelopment was a huge directive at that time. And, you know, going forward, we looked at like nature-based solutions and green infrastructure as one of the many tools that we could use to help meet that sustainable development goal. So I work for the Devon's Enterprise Commission, who is the regulatory authority. We operate with a unique one-stop permitting system. It's a unified permit. So the board I staff is the Planning Board, the Conservation Commission, the Historic District Commission, the Zoning Board of Appeals, the Board of Health. It's a very unique program, but it really helps with streamlining permitting processes in Devon's. So we've created a lot of regulations to help facilitate more green infrastructure and nature-based solutions. Everything from our site plan regulations, including tree preservation, steep slopes requirements. We limit construction zones. We don't allow for clear cutting of properties. We have native landscaping requirements, functioning landscaping requirements. You know, not just plant a couple of trees here. Look at the surrounding ecosystem and where can we you know, how can we reconnect to those existing more natural ecosystems? Green roof and wall requirements, parking maximums to help facilitate smaller footprints of development. So what does all this look like? Here's a picture of a 90-acre campus of Bristol-Myers Squibb on Devon's. Pretty big project, 7 large buildings, but you can see in the background, kind of the forest, the surrounding forested areas kind of integrated into the facility. Vertical parking going up instead of out to reduce the footprint of the development. A lot of low impact development techniques in the landscape islands. You see some green roofs and green walls on this front building, the BDB building there. Here's a close-up of those green roofs. And green walls just newly constructed. A lot of obviously co-benefits for these systems. We've got, you know, green roofs helping to deal with air quality issues, mitigate stormwater impacts, promote insulation in the building, so energy efficiency, and reducing that urban heat island effect. So some great opportunities for integrating green infrastructure there. We also have regulations that require low impact development as the first line of defense for stormwater management. We're lucky we have really good soils in Devon's, very porous sandy soils. But first and foremost, you know, we do require people to infiltrate on site as close to where the ground, as close to where the rainfall hits the ground. So that helps us create these decentralized systems. But we don't just tell people to do this. We give them guidance. You know, we have vegetated roof requirements and guidance, permeable pavement specifications, reinforced turf specifications, and a lot of these resources that helped us do that were from the University of New Hampshire, their Stormwater Center. So I put a link in there for that as well. And Mass DP has some good guidance as well too. So here's a great example of LID, you know, at biofiltration landscape island and a parking lot. This is a 300 space parking lot. It has a total of 3 catch basins and they're just for overflow. I don't think they've ever seen any flow because they're so well constructed. But the key to construction of these systems is durability. So you can see here the beginning stages of the design, and then, you know, the final planting and establishment, you know, that small gravel strip at the edge of the parking to reduce erosion, slow down the velocity. They actually ended up turfing putting in turf in this area to actually slow down the water before it hits the vegetation in the main channel. And all the vegetation helps filter the pollutants out of runoff as well too. Other regulations that we have in place include our subdivision regulations. We took a really close look at our regulations and realized that we had way too much pavement requirements in our local and collector streets. So we're trying to promote more green and less gray. And here's an example of a subdivision, a typical subdivision road. This is in one of the adjacent neighborhoods, but this could be anywhere. And we've really looked at creating more street standards that integrate green infrastructure into the streets, narrow the pavement, and use that right of way to construct some of these low impact development features. Helps with traffic calming. It's a great opportunity as well for the community in general, for public health and safety. So this is a rendering of a subdivision that we approved back in 2015. Much narrower streets. You can see street trees, a lot of green in the area, and it actually ended up turning out quite nice. This is what the area looks like today. You can see the bump outs. This is a 20-foot wide two-way street, so very narrow. Houses pushed right up to the street, so it gives that kind of sense of enclosure, so that naturally helps slow down vehicles, making it safer, but it provides all that area for all this green infrastructure. We've got, landscape islands, we've got brick pavers, pervious pavers, driveways are accessed, they're rear loaded driveways. So a lot of great features, and it adds to community character as well too. We also regulate rainwater harvesting. We require it for any type of irrigation systems. It's really an inexpensive supply of water, helps preserve drinking water supplies. We spend so much money, treating our water for drinking, and then, seeing it spread on lawns and irrigation. It really bothers me, and the amount of energy that goes into treating, pumping, and distributing a water that's been spent a lot of money on treatment. So this is a great opportunity to reuse water for or non-potable water uses for irrigation, for toilet flushing inside buildings, and other uses that don't require potable water. Helps reduce peak summer demand as well too. And as long as you think about these things early on in the design, it doesn't have to cost very much more. So here's a good example of rainwater harvesting, actually rainwater harvesting to the extreme on Devons. This is Little Leaf Farms. They're a hydroponic baby lettuce leaf growing operation. This is 10 acres of greenhouse that is growing baby leaf lettuce. The black areas you see here are rainwater harvesting basins, and they use that rainwater to irrigate up to 90% of their water needs for their crops. So it's a great way to reuse water. From another nature-based solutions, they use low impact development techniques, biofiltration landscape islands in their parking area. The whole building itself is surrounded by earthen berms that are planted with pollinator meadows. So that helps reduce stormwater runoff, but it's a natural pesticide control. The pollinator insects like bees eat the small bugs like aphids, which feed on the lettuce. So it's kind of a naturalized moat around this greenhouse. And so it's a great sustainability story. So lots of regulations, but how did we get support for all these regulations? It's a combination of education, guidelines, and incentives, and also seeing is believing. So we've done a number of case studies on Devons to show that these low impact development techniques and nature-based solutions can actually work. Even in the Northeast and cold climates, biofiltration landscape islands can work, and they can save you money at the same time. While there is increased costs for landscaping, site prep, soil mix, you get a huge cost savings from the amount of pavement you have to do, reduce curbing, reduce stormwater piping and structures. So there's a lot of benefits, and developers love to see those dollar sign benefits when they're looking at these projects. we've connected developers and contractors with other developers who have done this stuff before. A lot of people don't have experience implementing these types of solutions, but connecting the developers who have experience with them and showing it how it can be done is a great example. This is an example of a LID technique that was installed on a new project, and it was actually done by, we partnered with the developer who did this project, and he basically trained the developer for this project and the contractors on how to do it. So it was a great opportunity and showed them how it's maintained and operated. So seeing is believing, like I said. We did a pilot project for sustainable housing. The house you see here is a net zero energy house. We did a whole neighborhood of net zero energy pilot homes to show how they could be built in a cost-effective manner for little or no extra costs than traditional stick-built homes. We actually took it beyond the envelope of the building and looked at the lot level strategies as well too, to make it a net zero runoff project as well too. So this building, this house has no gutters. Everything infiltrates directly into the ground. Pervious walkways. The planting area you see in the front is a rain garden, which takes runoff from the driveway and excess runoff from the structure. So all this has resulted in the need for no catch basins or drainage infrastructure. Everything is infiltrating where it lands. So, these are good projects to show that it is being done and can be done. We also provide developers and applicants with guidelines too. So the green infrastructure guidelines that we've created for Devons, we've kind of shown examples of how they can integrate all these nature-based solutions into one project, and also how those nature-based solutions can help meet multiple regulatory objectives. I mentioned, co-benefits of nature-based solutions. There's co-benefits to achieving multiple regulatory aspects of projects. So we've done other pilots like little tactical urbanism projects like this makeshift bump out that we worked with our DPW on. It reduces pavement width, still accommodates emergency access, but it provides more localized infiltration. It's reducing urban heat island impacts and providing habitat as well too for plants as it kind of connects directly to this forest area just adjacent. This is our latest pilot project, really showing people how these nature-based solutions can work. This is a pocket forest project that we're working on with one of our partners in the adjacent towns. Tons of benefits. These pocket forests are basically an very intense planting area in underutilized urban spaces to help bring forested areas into the built environment. They're stacked with, we prep the soils with really high nutrients in order to enable these high density type forests to be able to exist in urbanized neighborhoods, and all those benefits we can get from those forests are magnified. The mental and physical health benefits of people having access to green infrastructure, healthy soils for stormwater management and greenhouse gas reduction, improving air quality, also taking underutilized spaces. This was just a lawn area before. Now it's going to be a productive piece of infrastructure that can serve as a habitat connection. As plants, animals, insects all want to jump from habitat to habitat. This allows them to do it a little better. So a really cool additional green infrastructure tool that we've been working on. We're also promoting nature-based solutions as a climate adaptation and resiliency strategy. You heard Jen mention about closed drainage systems and not being able to handle these more frequent and intense storm events. LID, it's an open drainage system. They have much more flexibility to ebb and flow with those peaks of those higher storm events. And also helping with greenhouse gas reductions as well too, by providing all the plants instead of pavement. Plants instead of pavement. Another education awareness tool that we've used to promote this is our Apple Country Natural Climate Solutions project. This looked at how soils are an important, healthy soils are an important part of the carbon sequestration strategies for towns and cities. So trees, and we know trees and forests are great carbon sinks, but the soils can handle a lot of carbon as well too. Wetlands can sequester even more carbon, up to 30 to 50 times more carbon than traditional soils or forests. So wetlands, they only cover 3% of the Earth area, but they're storing 20 to 30% of the carbon. So it's important to keep them healthy and allow them to function and sequester even more carbon. With having healthy soils, it just, the compounded benefits are just, too much to mention. The ecological benefits, public health benefits, and it's really giving us more tools to help integrate nature with development. Gives us more arguments for preserving our existing forests, wetlands, and soils. So it's a great strategy to provide if you're looking for more reasons why we should be protecting and the importance of healthy soils. Other education and awareness benefits that we use to promote the adoption of nature-based solutions. I worked on a street trees and community well-being webinar that with Green Roofs for Healthy Cities. They're an international green roof organization. And this was a course on the triple bottom line benefits, tools and resources for integrating nature into the built environment. And that's what these nature-based solutions are all about, is integrating the natural environment into the built environment for not only stormwater, not only climate benefits, but for public health and wellness benefits. And another cool program that we worked on with APA and the City of Lawrence was this street tree health impact assessment, really showing how vegetation, street trees and communities can really help combat a multitude of public health, stormwater issues, air quality issues. And it's got a lot of detail in it that even allows you to look at, okay, if there's a section of your community that has, say, stormwater issues, here's trees that are more able to absorb more stormwater that you might want to select. And if a community is having issues with air quality, you might want to choose a different type of street tree that can help sequester more carbon, particulate matter, ozone. Trees are very resilient, and they can be, the right tree in the right place can help rectify or help manage some of these public health issues that we're dealing with, as well as climate change and stormwater management. Another project we worked on to promote promote nature-based solutions integrated into developments is a green and complete streets policy. So most towns and cities have complete streets policies to really look at accommodating, multimodal accommodations, accommodating all users in the right of way. We really looked at, the right of way as a place for everybody. So, that includes green infrastructure. So we actually modified our complete streets policy to include green and complete streets to meet our sustainability goals. So it's, like I said, it's integrating those nature-based solutions into the public right of way. And for all those triple bottom line benefits, economic, social, and environmental that I've mentioned, and both Paul and Jen have mentioned as well. As part of this green and complete streets policy, we actually ended up partnering with Tufts, one of the developers of that kind of new urbanist type neighborhood that I showed you earlier with the 20-foot wide streets. And we partner with our Department of Public Works and Fire Department to look at how we could integrate these green elements into an upcoming road project or subdivision project. So we did a pilot and showed how those all could be integrated. So there's a link to it here. A lot of great solutions for you to check out. A couple of great regulation audit tools. A lot of these nature-based solutions, people want to do them, and then they get into the regulations of the local community, and they're not allowed. So a good thing to do is, as for the planners out there, is to take a look at your regulations in your communities and use these types of auditing tools that will help you identify, okay, where are there barriers to nature-based solutions? Where can we implement, more take away some of the restrictions that are prohibiting us from doing nature-based solutions, as well as this forest-friendly toolkit. The more forests we can, forestry, be it a small pocket forest, be it street trees, be it a biofiltration landscape island, the more green we can get into our developments, the better. So there's a great review kit or audit tool by the U.S. Forestry Service here as well too. Again, these slides are all going to be available. So I know I've shown a lot of links, but they'll all be, the slides will all be available for you guys after the presentation. So just in summary, collaboration is key. I think Paul was talking about this early on in his presentation. In order, there's co-benefits to all this green infrastructure and nature-based solutions. So there's multiple entities that can receive the benefits from this. So partnering with, our public works departments, our engineering departments, our fire departments to show the benefits. Like, there's some maintenance issues with some green infrastructure, but there's also some benefits like extended pavement life because it's providing more shade to adjacent paved areas, decreased flood damage, and the exponential value. Gray infrastructure depreciates. Green infrastructure, as it grows, it appreciates and it looks great. And so it's not out of sight, out of mind. So, that's another thing. You don't know these closed drainage systems, are failing until, flooding occurs. At least with, these open nature-based solutions systems, you can see if there's any problems right away. And that leads to quicker fixes and less flooding and less damage and fewer insurance claims. We've also, in terms of the partnerships, we've provided, we partnered with Niche Engineering. They're our peer review engineer, and Jen did a great job helping train our engineering and DPW staff. We've created in the process of creating a manual to help our DPWs understand how these nature-based solutions or these low-impact development techniques need to be maintained. They do require a little special care, but I think once the people who are maintaining them understand how they work, it's much easier for them to maintain. And connecting your local boards and commissions, there's shared interests on this stuff. Like I said, those co-benefits. So efficient land use, your planning board, the public health issues, your Department of Public Health, stormwater, the Department of Engineering, wetland protection, your conservation commissions. So there's a ton of benefits, that co-benefits, and finding those co-benefits and talking about those with your local boards and commissions is an important issue. So last slide, keys to nature-based solution implementation: reducing barriers, using some of those audit tools that I mentioned, building consensus, all these case studies, these fact sheets, seeing is believing, showing them how it's being done and that it is being done. And that's going to lead to market transformation. Increased awareness means increased in demand for these tools. And don't just jump in and try to regulate all this stuff. Educate, incentivize, develop specs and guidelines to help people do the right thing. And then lastly, support, your public works departments for training and budgets, as there is going to be some slight increase in maintenance, but this, the benefits far outweigh the added costs. So that is my presentation. This is my contact information. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. And I think we're going to turn it over to Q&A.
Great, thank you. Folks, again, if you have questions, type them into the Q&A box. And let's jump into the Q&A. All right. First question, we need to talk about pervious pavement. It's expensive. It can be hard to maintain. Is it worth it? Are there alternatives that still provide benefit, that maybe don't require as much maintenance? Who wants to go first?
I can jump in on that and then happy to have others add. I would say the most important thing about porous pavement is that we put it in a place where it's going to be best utilized, right? And what I mean by that is you bring up concerns about cost and maintenance, and I think those are both really valid concerns because the pavers are open, their purpose is to absorb water. So if it gets clogged, it's not going to work. And what was the point of doing it in the first place? So I think working together, engineers and planners at the early stages of a project to really understand the use of a space, whether it's going to be a heavy vehicular load or a pedestrian load, whether it's going to be an area that needs sand during the winter, which is obviously a no-go for porous pavement. So thinking really about how a space is used and the types of applications that might see before you move forward with a porous pavement application. Then we do have multiple types of permeable pavements, including porous asphalt, porous concrete, and permeable pavers. And Neil and I often talk about grass pavers, which is another form of a permeable, not really a hardscape, but an area that's a reinforced turf area that might also be able to support vehicular load. And so thinking through each of those types of strategies when you're considering how a space will be used to make a proper selection. So I think those would be the first steps to making sure that you're not maybe overcommitting a space to permeable pavement or getting yourself into a situation where you need really intense maintenance, which can be a real challenge if you don't have the right equipment.
And Jen, you know, I like the fact that you mentioned these are stacked systems in your presentation. So, I mean, that's saving the potential for, you know, areas for detention basins. So valuable, you know, in constrained sites, it's preserving valuable real estate, right? I'm just going to share my screen quickly again, too, if I can. I took porous pavement out of my presentation because, you know, as Jen was saying, it's not really a nature-based solutions, but it provides a lot of benefits. Here's you know, we use it all over Devon's, and I get this from every developer. Oh, it doesn't, you know, it's costly. It doesn't work. It works in the right situation really well. This is a big parking lot. The drive aisles are all impervious and just the parking spaces. This is a high volume traffic and is subject to truck traffic as well. So they only use it on the porous spaces. You see, this is during a rain event. Nothing is, you know, is collecting in the porous spaces. And, you know, even if porous spaces fill up with sand or sediment, you know, sand and sediment is all still impervious, still pervious. So it takes a lot to clog these systems too. The other thing I wanted to show was just the other thing that Jen talked about, which was reinforced turf. This is one of the ways in that new urbanist type neighborhood that I showed you. 10-foot wide alleys, paved ways. The other 8 feet or 10 feet is actually all reinforced turf. This allows the fire trucks to go in. So it's an alternative solution to porous pavement as well, for low traffic areas. It's a great opportunity.
So I just wanted to confirm what they say, because I think one of the concerns for planners is we specify, and as you've all identified, it's a very specific design decision, which one of those tools you want to need. So don't hang your hat on any one tool because they're appropriate for the things. And that's the beauty. There are a lot of tools, but sometimes you heard that earlier, oh, porous pavement is the answer. Well, again, it depends on the situation. So, and again, I would say also it's a fairly expensive one, but I think you two have articulated there's a lot of other ways to capture water. So you really want to save that for your high visibility, high impact, like you said, high value kinds of things. we've done tremendous things in Colorado with just a little bit of recanting of parking lots and then using some other kind of a landscape feature. Sometimes the porous pavement is helpful, but an awful lot of situations don't necessarily call for that. But I'm glad that Neil brought in there, and we ran through that for Denver for decades. Oh, it doesn't work here. Well, it absolutely does work in the right place, but it's not a panacea. It's one tool.
Next question. Let's talk about money. Let's talk about the cost of doing this. You know, everyone's on board. We all understand the benefits of it. We know that the upfront cost might be more, but then, you know, years down the line, it's going to be worth it for so many reasons. Okay, so this is a twofold question. The first portion is, how do communities incentivize developers to incorporate these nature-based techniques? And then the second portion of the question is, what about communities that want to initiate some of these nature-based themes on public or city-owned, community-owned complexes, whether it be, you know, either city hall or fire department, whatever it might be? Are there grants or things available for the public entities to utilize to incorporate? So first, how do we incentivize our developers? And then second, are there funds available for communities to look into?
Well, if I could just jump in and I'll share my screen. One of those things that I had to identify for people in one of my slides was, again, from the Research Foundation, the triple bottom line, because it addresses all those things that both Jen and Neil have mentioned. When you really look up at all these benefits, and you can see at the very bottom here, the benefit cost ratio is positive on almost all these things from around the country: Ohio, Seattle, Pennsylvania, Minnesota. So again, they've done very context specific design. And when you add those up, the finances do work. Now I'll bow out to let's know, well, then how do you incent developers? And I think Neil's answered that to some degree. There's incentive, that right combination. It can't be anything goes, because you have to have regulations, but there's a lot of things you can do to say, we've done the numbers on the big picture, it works for us, so how do we help you be the implementer of where we want to get?
Yeah, and we require very heavy on-site infiltration in our regulations. We don't tell developers how to do it. We use our green infrastructure guidelines as a kind of informative tool to show them, oh, here's a array of strategies that you can use to meet that 90% on-site infiltration requirement. So that helps incentivize it a little bit as well too. And again, the seeing is believing, showing them how it can be done. In a lot of cases, it's a developer who is not familiar with how to do this kind of stuff, and they add that unfamiliarity factor to their budget because they don't know how to do it. And they say, oh my God, it's going to cost this much more. Partnering them with other developers who have already done it to show them how it can be done was a strategy we used to help get more buy-in from the developers.
And I would also say in the West, planners should remember, or in any area, the fee you pay, the tap fee, the connection fee, there's a bunch of different names for it, but what you pay in on any development to be a part of the existing water system, especially in the West, is usually driven by irrigation of turf. So any degree to which you can reduce the amount of turf and or make the turf multifunctional or find some other sources like Jen talked about, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars, very, very significant incentives to do good engineering, do good design work, so you make sure you really prioritize those things. And so there's a lot of other kind of subfields. That's again back to why I mentioned the stacked incentives. You start looking about who benefits from a project that Jen or Neil did. There's a whole host of agencies that may historically have not thought about working together, but the developer certainly gets that because they have to answer to every one of those. When you put those together, and as I showed before, the triple bottom line really works in your favor.
I guess I can start to answer the last aspect of your question, Christine, which was regarding federal or state, maybe.
Yeah, where's the money at?
Yeah, so obviously I'm based in New England, so I have a New England centric answer, but I think that we're seeing a lot more funding mechanisms for nature-based solutions, including things like flood mitigation, climate change, adaptation design. So in Massachusetts specifically, we have what we call the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, and that includes planning and action grants that support municipalities in these types of projects. And I know there are similar grant programs in other New England states, including Rhode Island. And I think I've started to hear about it kind of up and down the East Coast. So I know as, unfortunately, it is a little bit reactive and less proactive, but as funds are being allocated to kind of bounce back from these types of climate disasters, we're starting to see more proactive funding to prevent this in the future. I don't know, Paul, if you're seeing that out west as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly with California, they're the most regulated, but also they have the most money. So increasingly across the country, you're right. We're seeing, well, let's rebuild differently if we were subject to those disasters. But it's a great question that, always where is that money? But I think you'll find more and more state agencies realizing we have to align, as Neil said, our incentives with our regulations. So we have the outcome is what we're going for.
That's right. And there's definitely earmarked funding within some of these more recent infrastructure bills that's being allocated for nature-based flood mitigation, green infrastructure, stormwater management type projects.
Yeah, and if you're having problems getting developers to do the right thing, and you're a municipality, using those municipal lands to, do a pilot, show them how it can be done, is a great opportunity to help incentivize and educate people.
Thank you. Here in Northeast Ohio, we might just have all 4 seasons in one day. It's a thing. And I know that, depending on what part of the country you're in, it might be very dry. It might be very cold and snowy. You might have you're prone to a lot of rain, a lot of flooding. Are there any of these nature-based solutions that we should really be careful about in terms of our location? Are there some that just don't work in certain types of environments, or, can't deal with fluctuations or things like that?
Yeah, I think Paul hit it on the head. The right technique for the right location. I'm sure Jen can probably talk more about the design, but the design of these systems in the Northeast, where we have freeze-thaw cycles, frozen ground conditions during the winter, we're not getting as much infiltration. The systems can be appropriately designed to allow for, proper overflow, or, designed with wicks to allow for localized infiltration during frozen ground conditions.
I would just add that if you start to look at it, these techniques are literally being used in cities all over the world. Every possible climate, every possible density. Again, the idea is it is really context-based, and so we can make it fit. Is there one size you plug in? No, there isn't, and that would be a problem. We learn more and more about it as we go forward, but I hope people aren't afraid, because the reality is there's probably some sister city, if you will, has done the exact same thing, but it might not be in the US. But the benefits are too many and too stacked and so much different than what we were doing before. Like I said, it's become pretty standard. People may have heard about China, the sponge cities, right? It's just absolutely standard practice as people move forward. So there's good information to be had from practitioners globally as well.
That's a great point, Paul, because we're really just talking about soils and plants to hold and absorb water. And so,
right.
Though the plant might be more local specific, I think you can certainly find research in peer cities across the United States and Europe and around the world that are already utilizing those systems and really working across professions, right, to tailor the systems to each locality. So I think you're absolutely right. They're so flexible and adaptable that there's no reason why we can't be using them across climates.
Yeah, it's funny. The pocket forest example I gave is actually based on the Miyawaki forest method from Japan, and you'll hear it referred to in the UK as tiny forests. So we actually stole it from overseas. So these things are being used all over the world.
Developers or cities are trying to implement some of these nature-based solutions. Are there any concerns coming from other partner agencies that would normally have some type of review process for it. So for example, like the fire department, would they have any issues in any way with any of these things? Or that's just my example. Are there any other entities that we need to be concerned about when we're looking to install some of these?
Yeah, definitely. There's always challenges. Public Works is one of the biggest, Public Works in your engineering departments, depending on the age of your departments. You know, you might get the engineer, the traditional engineer who says, no, I don't want these things anywhere near my roads. I just want the curb and gutter, closed drainage system. So educating, you know, I actually ended up taking one of our engineers up to UNH, the University of New Hampshire, their stormwater center, to show them all these examples of how these nature-based solutions, these low impact development techniques can actually work. And as soon as he saw it working, he was like, all right, let's do it. So, you know, just partnering with them, seeing what their concerns are and trying to address their concerns. Our fire chief, he's like, no way we're allowing a 20-foot road or a 10-foot wide paved alley. It's got to be 20 feet because I got to get my fire truck in there. And we're like, well, what if we did this? And he's like, oh, can my fire truck be supported on it? Like, yes. Showed him the specs. He's like, perfect, do it. So it's a lot of times it's having a conversation.
Well, Neil, I'm thinking about the other example you gave with Goddard Street, right, where there was some concerns about really narrowing down the right of way and adding some more traffic calming measures, and then you using the tactical urbanism to really, we kind of set up and painted out what it would look like, and then they actually brought their trucks out, right, to test it and make sure they could make the movements. So like you said, seeing is believing. I think that's really a most powerful tool. One anecdote I might add from the city of Boston is that you can imagine Boston is an older East Coast city. We have Department of Public Works, we have Boston Water and Sewer Commission, and then we have the Parks Department. Parks owns trees, DPW owns sidewalks and curbs and roadways, and Boston Water and Sewer Commission owns the catch basins and closed gray drainage system. And so when you talk about putting in a tree box filter or a bioretention bump out, you're involving all three of those agencies, and they historically haven't been set up to talk to each other and think about who's going to maintain that. You know, maybe they can all get on board to get it in the ground, but then the question of like maintenance over time. And so one tool that we've seen them use, and they've tried a couple of different times, but I think right now it's going really well, is to really have a green infrastructure head, the director of green infrastructure for the city, to really kind of join those forces and get everybody in the room together. So I know that's kind of been building over time just through different meetings and consensus building that they've been working on. But if we can do it in Boston, I feel like it can be done across the country.
And I just wanted to add a couple things to that. One of the things I think, Carla, in our discussions before with Christine, a lot of this nature-based systems, you're weaving together a lot of things, as you just heard. A lot of departments who historically either haven't worked together, been fairly with a lot of animosity or whatever, and planners have done that always, right? And looking at development in communities. And so there's a real opportunity for planners to embrace this because they bring a special skill of how do I weave them all together? No individual is an expert. And frankly, it takes all of those. On the roadway thing, I would just give you two other resources. One is the good work of Jeff Speck, S-P-E-C-K, who's kind of the walkability guru, because he's addressed every one of these roadway issues. It's not wide enough, it's got to be wider, it's not safe, all that stuff, and has chapters and chapters where he's really dug with all the dots around the country, the specifically traffic engineers things, and try to get down to what does the data really say and those kinds of things, and that may be helpful. That said, I think like Neil said, in the city of Portland, at least that's the antidote. The fire chief took 2 fire trucks around them. They just started driving around and realizing they could get by with a lot less than they thought. And so there's often a default to more is better. Well, we realize that has a lot of impact. So the city of Tucson is my other reference. The city of Tucson now has an ordinance that every roadway is responsible for the first half-inch of rainfall to put in their own green infrastructure. That's the first one I've seen where recognizing roadways are a huge part of all this. We need roadways, we need networks, those kinds of things, but they can't kind of get a pass, if you will. And a lot of things you've done are really to help to mitigate some of those things. And I'm guessing 2.0 or 3.0, wherever we are in this, we're going to realize we're going to find a few places going, can the roadways be alleys in this? And historically, we've used roadways to convey stormwater down a block to the drain, that kind of thing, right? So it's just a new evolution to that. But I think you're going to find there is data out there, and recognizing that is sometimes the hardest conversation of this whole process is sitting down with POW and going, how's that going to work? And that's why we've tried to bring up examples. Well, other people have had that conversation and somehow been able to come around the corner. So hang in there.
One more question, and I guess I kind of like the angle of this question. It's not so much what are ordinances we can use to promote green infrastructure. I mean, you've all touched on that a little bit, but this question is, what are some examples of regulations that actually prohibit green infrastructure? Sometimes I feel like it might be easier to pick out the pieces that, you know, inhibit it than, you know, pieces that we could add to it. Sometimes it's easier just to, you know, erase versus trying to create something new.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's the law of unintended consequences. You know, the example I used in my presentation was road widths. You know, you're requiring more space for pavement that restricts the use of green infrastructure elements. You know, like street tree issues too, right? Like if you require sidewalks directly abutting the street and you don't provide any space for green infrastructure in your regulations, that's an impediment. So really looking at what where there are opportunities to put that green into or in combination with the gray, you know, are the opportunities. Again, those auditing tools that I mentioned are a great way to go in and go, oh, well, I didn't really realize this would have a negative impact on, you know, green infrastructure. But again, things like roadway widths, sidewalk requirements, excessive pavement requirements, you know, allowing for centralized drainage systems and not requiring decentralized drainage systems. You know, you're accommodating, you know, traditional infrastructure if you you know, as opposed to you know, accommodating green infrastructure or decentralized systems.
And I guess I would just mention at the outset, which we have, and I haven't heard kind of, the city of Philadelphia has been doing this for probably as long as anyone. On a large city, they've had to rewrite maintenance manuals. They've had to work with the Department of Transportation, all that. And so again, there's good allies out there who've been down this road, and it's not easy. And sometimes, again, the realigning, but it can be done and it does work, and it's worth the conversation. So you're not alone.
Thank you. It's time to wrap up. It's time to go home. This was a really great conversation. We still have a ton of questions that weren't answered. Folks, you can reach out directly to the panelists, or you can just reach out to me and I can direct you to the panelists. These presentations with all the links that they mentioned will be available on our website, ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. A recording will be available in the Sustainability and Resilience playlist on our YouTube channel. Head over there, just type in planning webcast. Don't forget to log those CM credits. And I think that's it. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. This was a great conversation. And thanks to all you tuning in. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk next time. Bye.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.